Good afternoon, everyone. My name is Dan Sjoblom. I'm this year's chair of BEREC 2020 chair, and I have a great pleasure of welcoming you to today's webinar and stakeholder engagement session. I think we first should spend a moment of thoughts to those affected by the corona pandemic, which is making us have this meeting in this format. We would, of course, have much preferred all of us to meet physically today, as was foreseen in Brussels. We will, however, plan for the physical part of this meeting to take place as we had intended. A date in October is being worked on. We will get back to you as soon as we possibly can with a precise date for you to put into your agendas. And during the physical part in October, we will, of course, maintain the meet and greet session that we had announced for this year, where the co-chairs of the working groups would meet with you stakeholders. However, as we are in the situation, we, in any case, think it's a very good opportunity to learn new things. We are all, I think, doing a crash course on remote working, and look forward very much to having this session with you here today. I wanted, as an introduction, to point you to the work that BEREC did already some time ago now, maybe last week or maybe even the week before, with the European Commission on the joint statement where we are now monitoring the increased demand for internet capacity following in the path of the pandemic. We have set up already a special process to monitor the situation throughout Europe. We are, of course, ready to respond should there be problems. What we have seen generally so far is that you, our stakeholders who are operating the electronic highways of Europe, you're doing a good job. They look fairly robust, but we are, as I said, monitoring this on a twice weekly basis and reporting to the Commission. And you may have seen that we did a press statement fairly recently summarizing the situation, and I think we'll continue to communicate with you, our stakeholders, about this as well. And I should also say that this is not our first webinar. We had already some time ago, the Fixed Network Evolution Working Group had a webinar with a focus on high capacity networks. More than 60 stakeholders joined in for that meeting, and I'm sure we will have more webinars as this situation carries on into the later part of spring. We'll see how long it lasts, but I think we have an ambition to continue to interact with stakeholders very much, despite the obvious difficulties that we have. So keep your eyes out for our website, for our social media, and you will get invited to more things. Now, what we will focus on today is the draft BEREC Strategy, which lasts from 2021 to 2025, as well as the draft Work Programme for 2021. Both will in a minute or so be presented by our incoming chair, Michel Van Bellinghen. We had the opportunity to keep our first plenary meeting in early March, where the Board of Regulators decided on these documents to be launched for public consultation. So we are happy to have the discussion with you, having been able to see those documents published just after the first plenary. And during this session now, during the live stream, you can ask questions. We have received already quite a lot of questions in advance. Thank you very much for those. We will try to deal with as many of those as we can in the later part, but still, those who have not yet submitted, you can do so via Twitter and via email. You can find the address to both those accounts at the BEREC website. I won't read them out to you here to save some time. So I'm looking forward very much to a fruitful discussion and a new format for our stakeholder engagement. And with that, I hand over to Michel to present the strategy and the work program for 2021. Over to you, Michel.
Thank you very much, Dan, and hello everybody. My name is Michel Van Bellinghen, the IPT Chair and BEREC Incoming Chair 2021. It's my pleasure to interact with you in this webinar. Gives the stakeholders the opportunity to engage with BEREC on the draft strategy, and on the work program for next year as well. As Dan mentioned, those documents were published in March, on the 10th of March, and all interested parties are quite kindly request to send us their contribution no later than 13th of April. As you can see on the agenda I will share with you now, there is two parts of this during this webinar. The first one is about the presentation on both draft strategy and work program, and the second part is the Q&A session. And now you have on the screen the Twitter link and the email link you can use to send us your question no later than 2:30. So to start with the BEREC Strategy 2021-2025, we have proposed a new mission statement. In the previous midterm strategy 2018-2020, there was no mission statement, but in the previous one 2014-2017, and this is the one we have updated by replacing electronic communication markets by digital market, because we are in a digital era. New also is the period. It is 5 years in terms of 3 years period time. We think it's a better alignment with the legislative cycle of the commissions, and also a better match with the objectives and priorities of the new commissions between 2019 and 2024. Of course, this will remain linked with the multi-annual work program, and it is a long period, 5 years, so the strategy has to remain relevant, so we have the possibility to revisit this and to adapt if necessary. How do we define this? Well, we have looked through all those areas, and this strategy has been influenced by market, technological, and policy developments you see on the screen, and we also have taken the new EC priorities into account. As a result, we have proposed 3 high-level strategic priorities, but one important point is that the successful implementation of the codes and the focus on sustainability are very important horizontal principle which form an essential part of this strategy as well. So on the first one, BEREC wants to promote full connectivity. How? By continuing the work done on the guidelines, by creating stability and predictability to the benefits of the investments in a very high capacity network, by also closely monitoring the development of 5G, including the cyber security aspects, which are very important too. On the second pillar, second high-level strategic priority, we want to support sustainable and open digital markets. How? By continuing the work done on open internet, and we want to ensure that the implementation of the open internet regulation is predictable and also very clear and very predictable for everyone. But there is another element that is very important for BEREC, because we live in the digital era, and so we know that this big data and logarithm may offer huge opportunities, but also increase more and more dominant. That's the reason why it's important for BEREC to continue to build its knowledge-based strategy within the digital economy, and to make sure that all the economic, legal, technological, and user protection perspectives are well integrated in the design and the practice of regulation. And this is important too for a potential regulation of a digital platform. That's a second element. Third element, and in this pillar, is of course to focus on sustainable development goals that are relevant for an organization like BEREC. Last pillar, last high-level strategic priority, BEREC wants to empower end user. How? By continuing to promote the very strong protection level, and of course by helping users to be better informed in their choice. How can you choice? We do that by a high level of transparency, by comparison and measurements to geographical survey, and this is also an important geographical survey, and this is also important. BEREC has to make a kind of assessment in a report next year of all those end user and protection provisions in the code. So, of course, there is always room from improvement, and the first element is about the cooperation. There are two types of cooperation. The first one is more institutional one, and this is about the relation between BEREC and all those advisory groups, bodies, agencies, competent authorities within the EU, or with third countries, or even with international organizations. Examples are very well known: RSPG on spectrum, ENISA on network security, or the European Data Protection Body on privacy, or ERGA on audiovisual services. But there is also another type of cooperation with our counterparts at other organizations like America, where it's important for BEREC to continue promoting the European model. On sustainability, of course, running an organization like BEREC, the BEREC office implies a huge level of use of paper, of plastic, producing CO2 emissions. So this is something we have to take into account too. Developing the right tools is, of course, very important, not only for end users, and of course, trying to improve our engagement with stakeholders like we're trying to do today. So this is about the strategy, and on the work program, we have. I will give you first of all an overview of the process. As requested by the BEREC regulation, we have adopted and published a first outline of the work program for next year at the end of January. We had the opportunity to give you an overview during the first debriefing of the first plenary session of this year at the beginning of March. And on the 10th of March, together with the draft strategy for 21-25, we have also launched an early call for input on this work program for next year. So now this is this webinar, which is important for us to hear you about the priorities you have for us on the different areas BEREC should put the emphasis on. Later on, we'll have, of course, after plenary 3, the launch of a new public consultation about a draft work program for next year, which will be adopted at the end of the year during plenary 4. So what are the of for next year? So the first one is rather obvious. It's the same objective as the objective of the code. I don't need to repeat here. The second one is pretty obvious too. This has to be in line with the strategy 21-25, and which is still at a drafting phase. And of course, third element, BEREC wants to continue its advisory role towards the European institutions mentioned on the slide. And it's particularly the case whenever there is a new digital initiative, and it's important for BEREC to share its regulatory experience when it can mark the new legislative cycle too. And on the third element, it's important also for BEREC to play an important role in improving the consistent and harmonized application on the regulatory framework. It's important too to enhance the working methodology and to have a very cooperative and effective engagement with stakeholders. On the in the document published in January, the outline for the next year work program, this document has been divided into 6 parts you see now on the screen. But what's very important for us is that we need to prioritize our work and our resources. That's the reason why it is important to hear from you where we should put the focus on. So maybe one word about the mandatory tasks. Of course, we're not totally free to define what we'll do next year. There are some mandatory tasks mentioned on this slide. To start with, stemming from the high-level strategic priorities I explained during the first presentation, but of course, depending also on our cooperation strategy with other organizations and other agencies. And thirdly, there are some mandatory tasks stemming from the code, examples such as the BEREC opinion related to the market review phase 2 cases, or a BEREC opinion on end users' rights, or the general authorization revised by the European Commission, and BEREC as well, or the BEREC guidance to assist an array for a consistent application of geographical survey for the development for the network deployment. Sorry, those are mandatory tasks coming from the legislation, and I can add also, of course, the roaming like at home regulation and the open internet regulation as well. So, in addition to those mandatory tasks, there are other elements which might be important for you too. We have already planned in the draft work program for the 4 first elements mentioned on this slide, and potentially the 3 last one may be interesting for you to reflect on. So I've finished now those 2 short presentation, and we'll have a session with questions and answer. I will just, yes. So we'll have this session with Q&A. As Dan mentioned it, we have received some questions in advance. So in the first row, I will ask Dan to answer different questions, and the other way around after. And so in the meantime, I think that we've also already received new answers, new questions, and we'll see if there is some time left to answer them too. Okay. Dan, the first question for you. What role BEREC does anticipate to play in contributing to a consistent transposition in the ECC, and how? The floor is yours.
Thank you, Michel, and thank you for your presentation of the strategy and the work plan as well. Very clear, I think. Now, transposition of the code, which is at this very moment ongoing in all of the member states. It's important to stress that the transposition as such is, of course, a responsibility of those member states, and that BEREC doesn't have a direct view in or role in overseeing that. On the contrary, it's actually the EU Commission which oversees that member states are living up to their responsibilities there. Having said that, on the more formal side, of course, BEREC very much support a consistent transposition of the rules. And what do we then do in order to support that? Well, as always, BEREC is a group of NRAs which continuously engages in experience exchange, sharing best practices, agreeing common positions, and not least relevant in this in relation to the code is, of course, the guidelines that we have been tasked by the code itself to produce. And as all you stakeholders know, we are in the middle of producing guidelines on a very large number of topics. And we thank you for your contribution to all of the discussions on those documents, ranging from network termination points to very high capacity network definitions, co-investment criteria, geographical surveys, and so on. And I should just say also that for this year's work program, the 2020 work program, achieving the tasks set for BEREC in this respect is, I think, the #1 priority. And I'm quite confident that we will be able to deliver this despite the obvious disadvantages that we are now experiencing in terms of not being able to meet and discuss these things as much as we would perhaps have wanted to in our working groups. Back to you, Michel.
Thank you very much, Dan. I have another question for you. What should be a main driver for convergence of national markets towards functioning EU single digital market? Over to you, Dan.
Thank you. Now, convergence is quite a big word. I think it can mean different things to different people. When I think of convergence, I think primarily of services, and I think in terms of a functioning EU single digital market, that users in Europe should be able to use their services without experiencing limitations or differences when we again can actually move across borders, which is for the moment something which we long back to, I think. Having said that, I think on the more infrastructure side, which is also something where BEREC, of course, is very active, I think we will not really expect to have convergence in the sense of one system fits all, because we are having very different starting points in many respects, and I think we need to build out the infrastructure as the needs are in the different geographic areas. Back to you, Michel.
Thank you very much, Dan. Now I have some questions about 5G. I will read them all. With view to an intensive 5G network rollout across the EU, how can BEREC support the rollout of 5G? What could be BEREC's role regarding electromagnetic field emission, the EMF? How will BEREC promote access to 5G to avoid relay problems that EMVNO operators observe with 3G and 4G transitions? And lastly, does BEREC intend to take the wholesale dimension of 5G into account when drafting its report about the impact of 5G on regulation and the role of regulation in enabling the 5G ecosystem? Back to you, Dan.
Thank you. Well, of course, 5G is a very topical issue, and it has, as you can see from the different subparts of that question, which have been received from different people who have sent questions in advance of this session. It can have many different aspects. I will try to say something on most or all of them. Of course, 5G is something which BEREC will continue to follow and monitor very actively and very closely. Having said that, we don't really know how quick 5G is happening in different parts of the EU. Depends on obviously many things, most of which are outside of the control of BEREC or the NRAs. Depends on one very important thing, which is the business case that operators see in offering such services, both to private users and to business users, how interested they will be in switching from legacy services. And again, the interest in switching will depend on how well those legacy services cater to the needs. Of course, that depends on also what alternatives are and will become available. Wi-Fi is something which is also developing in parallel, just to mention something. And of course, we have the issue about devices. We all need to switch devices. There are affordability issues there. There's a question of how widely available they will be and at what point in time. What BEREC is trying to focus on is the regulatory challenges involved in 5G. We want to reduce regulatory burden and hindrance as much as possible to promote the ability of operators to roll out our very high capacity networks that we think will be a good thing for users and for the economy alike. Having said that, it's not only about rolling out 5G as such, it's about rolling out backhaul, which again is back to fiber rollout that's necessary for 5G to function. It's all about access as well to some of the traditional things like cell sites maybe, but also things like ducts and poles and dark fiber access will continue to be relevant. More specifically from the long question there, how we intend to take into account the wholesale dimension. Of course, the answer is yes, we intend absolutely to continue to take into account the wholesale dimension of this. This was already indicated, I think, in a report we did on 5G implementation and published last year in 2019 as a very important question for the development of the markets. And also maybe one word on EMF, which is another important point and where we are not seeing maybe all the harmonization that we would like to see across Europe. It's not a core competence of BEREC or the NRAs, generally speaking. We do have contacts with relevant authorities and bodies at the EU level. We can share with them our view that it's very important that, in particular, the health authorities, which have the highest credibility and expertise in discussing the EMF situation, do this and take it on as a priority. And also that we would very much like to continue to see a scientific basis for this discussion more than an emotional. Thank you. Back to you, Michel.
Thank you very much, Dan, for this answer. Now, something totally different and a short one. Will you continue BEREC's support to Western Balkan countries? Over to you, Dan.
Yeah, thank you. That was a shorter and easier question, and of course the answer is yes, we will. I think our colleagues and NRAs in the Western Balkan part of Europe is already since some time a fully integrated part of the BEREC family, and it's of course relevant for us to continue to work together with those authorities, and that I think is all I need to say on that. Back to you, Michel.
Thank you very much. Then I see that it's 2:30, so normally speaking, no more new questions for this webinar. But I have a last question for you we received in advance. Sorry, two last questions. The first one is this: how is BEREC practically involved in implementing the strategy for data and AI announced by the Commission in February? Which other parties are practically involved, and how do you interact with each other? Over to you, Dan.
Okay, AI is of course an intrinsic and very important part of the digitalization efforts that we see globally, and therefore it's something that we follow. It's not a core target yet. It does have an impact on many of the policies that we are in charge of, and there one can mention areas like net neutrality, end user rights, data protection, competition in terms of the data economy and different kinds of suppliers, and security. And it goes therefore that those are the areas where we have working groups doing BEREC work. They will have to be aware of the situation in AI, and we also have to be in contact and deepening contact with the regulators in charge of all of these areas that I mentioned. So that's what we are aspiring to do. I think that's the short answer. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Dan. I have one more question, which I cannot put on the screen. We have received this very recently, so I will read it. Does BEREC consider the sustainability of competition as a priority, and how will BEREC watch over the sustainability of competition in B2C and B2B markets? Over to you, Dan.
Well, sustainability of competition and competition to me are more or less synonymous. I don't think you can have unsustainable competition, and it's not competition, it's some sort of support scheme. I don't know exactly what is intended by this, but we, I think, are committed to competition. It's one of the driving elements, we think, of a functioning market in electronic communication. We would like there to be many different kinds of suppliers with between themselves different incentives to act on the market. Of course, there are always issues like access to capital, where we will have differences in terms of the ease of which different suppliers perhaps can grow and take on new concepts. But as long as markets remain open and there is a large number of suppliers that are able to operate, I think that's the best scenario. So that's something we are interested in promoting and continue to promote. I'll leave it at that for the moment. And I think it's time for me now to switch over with some of the questions that we have received that may be a little bit more forward-looking, and therefore I'm going to ask you some of those questions, Michel. Which topics do you think will prevail in 2021? Over to you.
Thank you very much, Dan. So I can't give a definitive answer to that question now. It will depend on the feedback we will receive in the coming weeks and months. But I think that certain topics which are relevant now will remain, like cybersecurity, EMF, and supporting the 5G rollout as well as a first element. Second element related to the draft strategy and the main challenges and development we have seen in the preparation. with topics like network convergence, digital services, AI, you mentioned as well. And so those are certainly relevant topics for next year work program. Moreover, I think that in the light of the Green Deal, we need also to focus on the sustainability. This is something we need to deal with. And lastly, maybe also the impact of COVID-19 pandemic on the networks is something we need to evaluate, maybe this year, but also in the coming years as well. Over to you, Dan.
Thank you, Michel. That's quite a long list of topics, so we will be very busy, I think. One thing you didn't mention, and my next question is about, we're all eagerly awaiting, of course, the upcoming Digital Services Act. And we have received the question, what is BEREC's thinking? What are the challenges ahead of the regulation regarding digital platforms? Back to you.
Thank you very much. This is a difficult question as well, and I will start with the second one on the challenges for regulators. I think that the main challenge for a regulator is getting the regulation right. This is a complex topic. We know that we are not alone. BEREC alone can solve any problem. This is something we need to do jointly, so we need to cooperate horizontally and even across the traditional regulatory boundaries together with other regulators on different aspects. We as BEREC would like to put the focus on solving potential market failures, and we don't want, and we want to avoid to stifle innovation or cause adverse effects in the market. In other words, we don't want to try to fix what's not broken. Going back to the first question on the DSA, we're very eager to see what the European Commission will come up with, of course, in this DSA package, and we are mostly interested in ex-ante regulation, because ex-ante regulation is our core business. This is where we have the experience, market analysis, imposing ex-ante remedies. That's what we have done. For many years now, and so those are mostly the aspect we have interest in, the economic analysis of digital markets. And in the future, who knows, BEREC will have maybe a role in the new regulatory framework to be designed for digital gatekeepers. But for the time being, I just can stress on the fact that we need to do this in cooperation with other bodies, because we don't need with privacy issues, we don't need with content and speech. This is the tasks of other body, and we have to ask ourselves why those digital platforms need to be regulated, what, how, and by whom. And it's of course up to policy makers to decide if there is a role for BEREC. We just can propose our assistance, but we are not begging for new competence. What's important to mention is that we think that for the economic aspects, we would need both ex post and ex ante regulation to be combined. Over to you, Dan.
Thank you, Michel. I have a couple more questions here for you. The next one is about the status of the open internet consultation. Stakeholders want to know if they can get specific feedback on submissions.
Thank you, Dan. As you probably know, public consultation ran from 10 October to 28 November last year, and we've received 52 responses to the public consultations. So we are still in the process of analyzing and discussions all those contribution. And as foreseen in the work program of this year, we intend to adopt by mid-June an update guideline, the update guidelines and the consultation report as well. This is for the first question. On the second question about feedback of the submission of stakeholders, we know that there is sometimes some criticism about the interaction and transparency towards BEREC. And we know that public consultation are not the only way to engage with stakeholder. That's the reason why we had planned in theory this morning to have this meet and greet session with stakeholders, which by the way has been quite successful at the registration stage, as you know, but unfortunately, as you already mentioned, we had to postpone this physical stakeholder forum, and we'll try to fix this in October this year. And of course, another way to engage is by organizing the open workshop with stakeholders. But again, on this, we had to cancel some of this because of the COVID-19 pandemic as well. Over to you, Dan.
Thank you, Michel. Now comes one of these fairly long questions. It has starts with the International Roaming Benchmark Data Report, which was submitted in June of last year. And the question is that still valid? Is there room for reduction in wholesale roaming caps still? Will BEREC adopt another opinion before the end of 2020? And then there's a second question there, which regards to consumer protection rules and consumer transparency. Do we intend to reopen discussions on the necessity of having forms of device neutrality, regulated or otherwise? And then the third leg of the question is whether we intend to do further data collection and reporting on the availability and take-up of IoT and 5G wholesale international roaming, 5G wholesale access and network slicing. You see the question there on screen. So can you handle all of those questions, Michel? Back to you.
Thank you very much, Dan. I will handle this one by one, and I will start with the question about international roaming. So BEREC hasn't conducted a new assessment on the reduction of roaming wholesale costs based on the latest benchmark data report. So we cannot provide any answer based on this new assessment. Nevertheless, we think that there is no indication that the conclusions we made in our opinion of last year in June and a follow-up opinion in September would not be or should not be maintained. If we would adopt another opinion based on the legislative of the Commission, it's not totally sure for the time being. Of course, we are still happy to provide assistance to the Commission and to give the Commission any input whenever needed. And I have to stress as well that in the context of the review of the roaming regulation, we provide also assistance to the other European institutions, the Council and the European Parliament as well. This is about roaming. On the question related to consumer protection rules and transparency about those necessity of device neutrality regulation. So I will start with the BEREC assessment on the impact of premium content on ECS markets we published 2 years ago. And based on this, we need to identify what is it about. So the question is whether devices may challenge the general objective of open internet in terms of how end users can practically use internet services on their devices. And coming back to this document of 2018, that's why we stated that we would monitor whether the app stores act as a gatekeeper regarding applications and subsequently regarding much of the content to which end users can have access on the internet. So for the time being, we are monitoring the markets, and we are considering a follow-up to report to assess the market evolution on the one hand. But for the time being, there is no concrete timing decided yet. And second element, of course, we will have to wait for the publication of the Digital Services Act package to see what the Commission will bring up or not about this net neutrality for devices. That's about the second question then. And on the last one, I can keep it brief because you have already mentioned this in your answers about 5G ecosystem. Of course, last year there was a first assessment based on stakeholder inputs we have published. And for the time being, we are in a drafting phase to publish for public consultation a second report by mid-June. But again, due to this COVID-19 pandemic, the workshop we planned with a stakeholder this week actually has been cancelled, and we are considering to postpone it to October as well. So, of course, we will continue to prioritize work about 5G. 5G in the relevant verticals is something very important for our strategy, and so it makes sense to conduct further data collection and to monitor the market. But for the time being, it is too soon to say that if there are barriers and benefits for operators. That's all for those questions. And over to you.
Thank you, Michel. Now we're leaving the part where we have written down questions, I think. So we have received many questions from you out there in cyberspace. Thank you very much for those. There is no way we're going to be able to respond to all of them in the 12 minutes that we have foreseen for the program. But I have a first question for you, Michel, which is to deal with ETSI standards. So the question is, can BEREC support ETSI standards for location-based enabling of radio interface of devices?
Thank you very much, Dan. Of course, this topic is dealt by the ECC. The European Electronic Communication Committee. This is an organization of the CEPT, and this is a competence of the ECC, not for BEREC. So the standard for location-based enabling of the radio interface of devices using radio communication is dealt with one of the working group of the ECC. BEREC cannot intervene in the work of the ETSI producing in the standard, and so the collection of data could be an idea, but this is not really something for BEREC, but more specifically for the ECHO, the European Communication Office. Over to you, Dan.
Thank you. I'll take a question that we have received from over Twitter as well now. So And this is a question for you, Michel, about your intentions and priorities looking at best practice and new opportunities for indoor enterprise or rural cellular networks. What have you planned? How will BEREC work in relation to the discussion on local spectrum licensing, numbering, and other related issues? Is this something you would like to comment on?
Thank you very much for your question, but I don't understand really what is it about. So maybe we can come to this later on or on another occasion.
That is fine. There are many more questions. I can try another one. This is back to platforms, I think. How will BEREC contribute to the reflection of the Commission on potential ex-ante rules for gatekeeping platforms? In what form will it do it? And will it participate into the forthcoming public consultation on the DSA? Can you say something about this?
Yes, Dan, thank you very much. Yes, of course, this is something we are reflecting on, and this topic, the potential digital platform regulation, and more specifically, the dedicated role for BEREC, if any, is something we are discussing for several months for now. And yes, we have decided to participate in the public consultation and to give BEREC's views on in the context of this Digital Service Act package, which will be, I guess, pretty soon will published by the European Commission. So the answer is yes.
I think we're all looking forward to the release of the document that has been on our radar screen for quite some time now. Have you got any questions from any of the live feeds for me?
I have one question for you, Dan, just received now. How does BEREC reconcile the 5G as a cloud of solutions with the 5G dependence on fiber? Is this something you can tell us about?
Well, I think, generally speaking, I think we're all interested in achieving the targets for very high capacity network rollout. And as always, I think we as BEREC and as NRAs are striving to be technology neutral. Having said that, of course, we are aware that fiber networks offers speeds which are difficult to match for many other technologies, at least over long distances. And they are also very much used, as I mentioned earlier on, as backhaul for wireless technologies. So I think when we talk about 5G as a cloud of solutions, I suppose we are talking about all the very high capacity network solutions offering the connectivity opportunities that we are really seeking. It's not so much about the specific technology, it's about what the technology offers to European users, be they private users or business users, and the way that they offer us to work more innovatively and creatively in Europe. That's how I would interpret the need for that.
Thank you, Dan.
Do you have anything more for me?
No, I don't see it.
Well, I think we should perhaps then, we are 5 minutes before the end of the hour. I have been told that we have had more than 200 viewers at the live feed. So thank you all very much for being with us over this hour. I hope you have enjoyed the show, even if it was in a different format from what you perhaps had hoped for when you signed up. Now, we are doing the best we can under the current circumstances. I appreciate very much the interaction, all of the questions that we got. There were very many questions that we didn't have the opportunity to answer to. Some organizations submitted whole batteries of questions. And of course, they are all going to be looked at and considered in much more detail than we could do during this live feed. They will go into our continued planning of our strategy, our continued planning of our work program going forward. So thank you very much, all of you. Even if you didn't get your questions read out and answered today, please be assured that we are going to take them into account in our future work. So I think that's really everything I wanted to say as a conclusion for this, and also very much thank you, Michel, for the interaction that we were able to do at this way. To all of you stakeholders in the middle of the pandemic, wherever you are, please try to stay safe, follow government advice, follow the lockdown, and take care of each other. And we'll get through this, and I hope to see you all in a physical meeting in the not all too distant future. Now for some final comments, back to you, Michel.
Thank you very much, Dan, and thank you everybody for organizing this, and to all the viewers, and for your questions as well. And I just can repeat what Dan mentioned. We really hope to be able to organize a real and physical stakeholder forum later this year, most probably during the month October, and I hope we will come up with a date very soon. And in the meantime, take care and be safe. Thank you very much. See you later.